problem tonight is that I know too much. And by that I mean that I used to be a professor, and so I've been to many academic seminars, and a great many of them took the same basic form. The speaker would have about an hour to talk, so he'd spend 15 minutes just kind of muttering about how he got interested in the topic. And then he would spend about 45 minutes doing calculus on the board and correcting the calculus mistakes he made as he went along, and drawing really ugly graphs, and being interrupted so frequently by the faculty at the seminar that no one could tell what the train of thought was. And then finally he would kind of get around to drawing his conclusions, which were never that earth-shattering, I have to say. So the point is that you know, these kinds of talks don't try to do too much. They're trying to get to one little point that doesn't amount to much in the first place. Now, what I'm trying to do tonight is quite different, because my real topic is a comparison of the Great Depression and the current economic troubles. And that's a gigantic subject. Just talking about the Great Depression, I could give you all a course, easily give you a course, and give you two if you could sit still for it. So there's a lot going on in these big events, and I'm going to have to be very selective in what I say tonight. And I don't want to bore you by just going over extremely familiar ground. I'm going to presume that you've all heard of the Great Depression, and that you're aware that there are some economic troubles in the world right now. So I'll take that as a given, and try to talk to you at a level that doesn't talk down to you. At the same time, I don't want to go too far ahead of those of you who haven't devoted a lot of time to these subjects. The Great Depression began in the middle of 1929, if we think of it in terms of when a national output in the United States reached a peak and began to decline. Most people think of it as beginning in October, when the stock market crashed, and very often they think of that stock market crash as a kind of cause and effect thing. The stock market crash causes all the suffering that follows in the next 11 or 12 years. That's perhaps not entirely wrong. There's at least an argument that can be made for that, but most economists don't think of the stock crash in itself as so much a cause as a kind of advanced signal that troubles were lying ahead. But what I want to do is go through several different aspects of these two times of economic difficulty, not just for the United States, of course. These are difficulties that extend over large parts of the world, especially the most advanced economic parts of the world. So there is that international element that's important. I'm not going to say too much about anything other than the United States, because that's a big topic in its own right. So I want to sort of compare and contrast these two grand events. It's kind of strange to call each one of them an event. Each one is a kind of complex of events, many interrelated. And I'll speak first about the lead-up to these troubles, and then the bust, the government measures that were taken in response to them, and then say a little bit about what you might call the ebb and flow of these drawn-out periods of kind of economic ailment and political cure, going back and forth, and finally say a little bit about something I call regime uncertainty, which is an important upshot of the government's measures to deal with the Great Depression and perhaps a significant upshot of the present government's anti-recession and anti-financial debacle measures as well. So let's see if I can plow through some of these things and say something sensible. There are some similarities. In fact, I've been struck by the fact that a number of people, journalists and others, in the last year or year and a half have been drawn to these similarities. I don't think it's been the case before in any of the economic downturns of the post-World War II period that a lot of people have rushed to see similarities between what was happening and the Great Depression. But this time, quite a number of people have done that. And when I first began to notice it, I was shocked. My immediate reaction was, what idiots. They're comparing what's going on now with the Great Depression. That was so much more horrible and so much bigger and longer lasting and devastating and consequential and all the rest of it that surely they can't be serious. And I think some of them weren't serious. They were tendentious, and they were using this talk in order to try to sell some kind of policy they had in mind to the government or to the people who look to the government. But the more I thought about it, the more I've come to see that there are some interesting and possibly important similarities between these two economic debacles. And by drawing out these similarities, I don't want to give you the impression that I really believe they're fully comparable. I still don't. I think practically anybody would be much happier living through our current troubles than he would have been living through the troubles of the 1930s. But however that may be, let's see what some of the similarities are. First off, unlike most modern macroeconomists, I don't think the story of these troubles begins the day the economy turns down. There are a lot of events that happened beforehand, and in the case of the Great Depression, many of these events cannot be understood fully unless we go all the way back to World War I. Because World War I altered the economic and political and institutional setup of the advanced economic world. For 100 years before that, the world, the advanced world, had enjoyed a period of relative peace, growing division of labor, growing international trade, technological progress, and rising incomes for the masses of people. You may have gone to school somewhere where they taught you about the horrors of industrialization. Well, that doesn't mean there were no horrors. I'm not going to poo-poo the idea. Life was very difficult for many people in the 19th century, without a doubt. But at the same time, life has always been difficult for people throughout history. So the thing that really makes the 19th century unusual is not that a lot of people had hard lives, but that so many millions of people had lives that weren't so hard as the lives of their ancestors. That economic progress was occurring on a scale which actually affected the masses. There had always been very wealthy people in a lot of societies that lived well, although eventually even those at the top of the heap could be seen to have lived worse than ordinary people came to be able to live after a lot of economic progress had taken place. But in any event, the 19th century saw a great deal of economic progress, and it had much to do with the spread of institutions like secure private property rights, international trade, specialization, technological progress, and a lot of things that were interrelated. And the United States was in the forefront of these developments. And the level of living in this country grew enormously up to World War I. Now, World War I involved all the major economic powers of the world to some extent, and most of them heavily. And as a result, the governments of these countries basically wrecked the institutional setup that I've been describing, which had developed over a century, or in some cases several centuries.